Well, the United States is considering a request by Ukraine for long-range Tomahawk missiles. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin warned against it while hosting an international foreign policy forum at Russia's Black Sea resort of Sochi. He also condemned France's detention of a Russian-linked ship as piracy. The European Union had blacklisted this tanker as part of Russia's sanction-busting shadow fleet. Putin warned the West that seizing Russian ships could trigger a forceful response and destabilize the global oil market.
It is impossible to imagine that with a loss of volumes of Russian oil, a normal situation in the global economy and the energy sector will be kept. If that were to happen, prices would skyrocket. Oil prices would go over $100 instantly.
For more on all of this, I am joined by our international affairs editor, Philip Turle. Hello to you, Philip. How should Vladimir Putin's comments be interpreted?
Right. Well, there are several ways of looking at this. I think one of the ways is that Putin is probably pretty worried about what's going on in Europe right now. The Western force in the old days was Europe plus the United States plus Japan. This time around, it really is just Europe, and Europe has announced big increases in its military spending. There's just been a budget passed for 150 billion euros by the European Commission last month. And the military spending in Europe is 4 to 5 times greater than that in Russia right now. So Vladimir Putin, I think, is probably pretty concerned and maybe a bit worried about what is going on the other side of the border between Russia and Europe and the European Union. And at the same time, there is worry in the European Union about what Russia is doing. That is not a very good mix when you've got both sides who are scared about each other. That means that the situation could be ramped up pretty quickly. And we've seen overnight the fact that there have been more attacks in Ukraine, 381 drones and 35 missiles hitting the energy infrastructure. Vladimir Putin is using the situation in Europe as an excuse for continuing the bombing and the raids on Ukraine, saying basically that Russia is the country that's under attack and it has no alternative but to do that. But the bottom line here, William, is there are questions being raised as to whether Vladimir Putin regrets not having agreed to a US peace plan for Ukraine earlier this year, because he's facing not a very positive situation right now. The situation is going not very well on the ground in Ukraine, contrary to what he's been saying in that meeting yesterday. And he was offered keeping hold of Crimea and certain provinces in Ukraine, and Ukraine not becoming a member of NATO. He's been turning that down through, I think, the advice of his generals. And the situation is not looking any better right now. To sort of put this into context, you can look at the situation in Ukraine as being similar to what would happen if France invaded Belgium. How long would France take to overcome Belgium and take control of the whole country? After 3 years, France has only managed to get as far as Charleroi, south of the capital, Brussels, and that's it, which is not very much to show. And I think that is something, when you call it into context, shows the struggle that Russia is having in Ukraine, contrary to what Vladimir Putin has been saying right the way down the line. Last point on this is the Tomahawk missiles that you were just mentioning in your introduction. That is a pledge from the United States and their Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin obviously worried about that too, saying this could also increase the risk of more conflict and damage the relationship that he has with the United States and Donald Trump.
Yeah, and on Thursday we saw 50 leaders convening in Copenhagen for this summit. At that meeting, France's Emmanuel Macron said the EU defense ministers should be meeting to talk about Russia's shadow fleet. This is some 900 illegal ships. What is the latest concerning the ship that was stationed off the coast of France?
Well, the ship, from the latest reports today, is now back at sea, but the captain has been arrested and he faces trial in France, basically for failing to stop when asked by the French maritime authorities. And Emmanuel Macron has been using what is called Article 110 of the United Nations Montenegro Bay Convention, which dates from 1982, which obliges shippers and captains to stop when asked by countries to produce information about what they have on board, their crew members, whether they are actually a ship that's sailing under another country's identity. And that was why the ship was pulled in. There are obviously worries about the fact that it was in Danish waters or close to Denmark while these drones were flying over Denmark just over a week or so ago, especially over Copenhagen and Aalborg airports. So there is suspicion this ship, which was masquerading as a Russian ship, was responsible for these drone incursions. That has not been proved yet, and the Danish authorities say they still don't know where these drones are coming from. But I think what Emmanuel Macron wants to do is to stop this fleet of ghost ships, which are transporting Russian oil to many countries around the world illegally, where it's then sent back to countries on a legal basis, saying that 70% of Russian oil is being transported in these up to 900 ships around the world, which accounts for about 30% of the money used for the war effort in Ukraine. So by stopping these ships from sailing, that is going to bring Russia closer to the negotiating table because it will affect its war effort. And one of the key elements of this Copenhagen conference that happened yesterday was to stop Russia from funding the war, to weaken Russia's position, to bring Russia to the negotiating table to stop the war in Ukraine. And that is one of the efforts that Emmanuel Macron has jumped on to say this is what we could do to bring Russia to the negotiating table. So there is now going to be a meeting in the next few days of the military in Europe, the heads of state of military and defense ministers to discuss how this plan can move forward.
Meanwhile, Europe wanting to build a drone wall. How is that going?
Well, there again, that is, I think, there's universal agreement over that in Europe to stop these drones from coming in from presumably Russia into European territory. We've seen these drone flyovers in Munich overnight, which once again stopped the airport from running. I think what the Europeans would like to do is, obviously, there's three things: to build to use detector drones. They're will be relying a lot on Ukraine for this. Also, microphones, which are very important to detect where drones are coming from and when they're coming. And the third one is to intercept them, not to shoot them down, but maybe using nets or laser cannons, which can also be used to intervene to get rid of these drones, to stop them from causing damage. So that's what the plan is going to be. It's not a big wall. But there's, I think, going to be disagreement within Europe about the spending, how much money is going to be spent on this and who's paying for what, whether the Eastern European countries are paying more than Western European countries. So that might be the hardest barrier to overcome. But certainly after this meeting in Copenhagen and what has been happening in recent days, certainly over Denmark and other European countries with flyovers, especially in the eastern part of Europe, more consensus that something needs to be done to stop this from getting any worse.
All right, Philip. Thank you very much. Philip Turle, France 24's foreign editor.